So this is a new channel. This would just be the fourth episode that I've put up. The name of the channel is A Perfect Venn Diagram. And the idea is that the argument is that we need to start thinking about what the perfect Venn diagram would be. The overlap of the facts as they are, whether we like them or not, the philosophies that would spring from those facts, and the moral character that it would take to have the right philosophical approach. So maybe, in one corner you put the facts as they are, in another corner you put character, you blend those, and perhaps it brings you to the right philosophy. But there's a lot that would go into that to get the perfect overlap that would create the perfect Venn diagram. So the first episode I published was, about a week ago, and it was called "A Democrat Agrees with Charlie Kirk." And up front, I aired a lot of my disagreements with Charlie Kirk. I did not agree with most of what he said. Um, for me, he was one of those figures that I was, generally aware of, but hadn't done any deep dive. And then when he was killed, I had to go and take a look and see what he had said. And for me, it was like one of those things, he was who I thought he was. But the step that needs to be taken further is not just to disagree with people, but to find out, okay, what are some of the hardcore truths that they have on their side that my side isn't incorporating into their Venn diagram? And so I gave some really clear examples of what I thought those facts were. So it seems like conservatives are going to be more naturally attuned to facts, and liberals are going to be more naturally attuned to character. I think you find more good people by far on the left than you do on the right. But the problem is that good character isn't enough if it runs afoul of facts. And so we're trying to find that blend. So on the left, when I'm looking at somebody on the right that I'm disagreeing with, the step for me though is to say, okay, what are the hardcore truths that are supporting their views? If they're poorly articulated or if they're just using them in a hateful way. Nonetheless, what's the market signal on that side that says something's up on my side that doesn't quite get it? And so, two of the facts that I put out, and this is just, in my opinion, but one being that the robust 100-year long scientific finding that there is unfortunately a difference in IQ among races is real. And so we on the left have to take that into our Venn diagram. If we really want to do any good, if we really want to help people, if we really want to meet them where they are, if this is a scientific truth that's been borne out in the scientific study of the subject, but is also borne out in all of our daily experiences, it's borne out by the free market. We have to look at that and accept that as true. The argument I would make to the right is that you guys lack the character to use a fact like that correctly. You lack the character to use that in a loving way, right? Most, again, of the good character comes from the left, but that comes at the cost of naivete, which is often weaponized, is often taken advantage of. The other truth, as I see it, is that the trans phenomenon is false. It's just really not a thing. Now, I'm personally open to the idea that for somebody, a very rare somebody somewhere out there, there's a condition that they have that gender reassignment surgery would make them feel more comfortable in their own body. And for that very rare person, I'm more than willing to, do everything I can to make them feel comfortable, to use their pronouns, and, to be respectful. My problem is that in the last 15 years, trans has increased 50-fold. It used to be back in the day that 1 in 10,000 people might identify as trans. It was almost always a man in his 30s wanting to become a woman. There was almost no women that were identifying as trans. These days, 1 in 200 people identify as trans. That's a 50-fold increase in 15 years. A five-fold increase would be cause for serious skepticism. A 50-fold increase just begs an explanation that is not forthcoming. So I see trans as really just narcissism. There is a lot of power on offer for individuals to claim trans. And again, another statistical clue that we have that this isn't an organic thing, this isn't some medical condition that's randomly distributed in the population, a product of genetics, is that it doesn't present itself in the random fashion that, say, homosexuality does, right? If you start asking around, start talking to people, almost everybody is going to have a family member that is gay. When you look at, various professions, when you look at the various races, it just presents itself as something that's randomly distributed in the population and is therefore a product in some way of genetics. It's something that somebody is born with. And this would be the argument for trans, right? Trans comes right on the heels of the acceptance of gays and the acceptance of gay marriage, and it comes straight from the same playbook. And so the idea is that people are born trans, except it doesn't present itself that way, right? The studies show, the statistics show that it clusters very heavily among certain educational classes, certain income classes, certain neighborhoods, certain schools, certain friends groups, and it's way overly represented among Gen Zers, among young people. Somebody, I saw somewhere in a podcast made a great point that where are all the people in their 60s going trans? When gay marriage, became law, there were plenty of people that had been in monogamous relationships with somebody of the same sex for decades that were getting married in their 50s, 60s, 70s, even in their 80s. And you just don't see any of that. I'm a Gen Xer, and you just don't see a lot of Gen Xers going, oh God, now I can come out as who I really am. So why do you have these, educational classes, these income classes, these schools, these friends groups where trans takes off, and these age groups where trans takes off, but you don't see it randomly distributed among the population? So just after that first episode, then there was this interview between Ezra Klein and Ta-Nehisi Coates, where they hashed out their differences. Ezra Klein, in the day after Charlie Kirk was murdered, came out and said he felt that Charlie Kirk practiced politics the right way. And I agree with him, on the face of it. What he intends from that, I agree. I don't agree with Charlie Kirk's pandering to hate. I don't agree with Charlie Kirk's own positions on, for instance, Democrats, people on the left get beat up that we were too insensitive in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death. Well, Charlie Kirk himself was insensitive in the aftermath of the attack on Paul Pelosi. He called for his own listeners, his own viewers, to bail the attacker out of jail, right? So, specifically, no, I don't agree with Charlie Kirk, but yes, I agree that he was using his First Amendment right to practice politics the right way, which is to debate, hold speeches, whatever. I can disagree with him on the specifics, but I don't disagree with him on his use of the First Amendment. And so I think that's just basically what Ezra Klein was saying. And then Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote an article that was very critical of Ezra Klein, and they happened to be close friends, so it was uncomfortable. And Ezra brought him on his podcast, and they sat down and they had a nice discussion that lasted for a little bit over an hour. I've listened to that discussion twice. I don't find anything controversial in there. I don't find anything to blast Ezra Klein in all caps and say his points were obliterated and he's ripped to shreds and blah, 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 as I've seen on a lot of left-leaning podcasts. Destiny, Sam Seder, and Hassan Piker, just to name three. And now that I've put it into the search engine on YouTube, it's coming up all the time. So this morning, a young woman's little short video came up and she was doing the same thing. Let's all jump on Ezra Klein for being a nice, reasonable guy and giving a very, it's one of those things reasonable people can disagree, right? Like you don't have to agree with him, but there's nothing there to rip him to shreds over. So I'm going to play her video. It's very short. It's just a little bit over 3 minutes and give my reactions to it. And so here, Ezra Klein was cringe. Let's talk about it. There was nothing cringe about Ezra Klein. He had a very rational position, a good heart, and he made his points very intelligently.
Ezra Klein interview was an embarrassing example of a breed of political thinking that is going extinct for good reason. He is a tremendously naive, privileged, out of touch political hobbyist. And he put it best himself, he doesn't know.
Right. So there, he's naive, out of touch, privileged political hobbyist. I would say that the man is a little bit more than a political hobbyist, being that he's the top opinion writer. I think he may even be the opinion editor at this point for the world's most influential newspaper. So this is one of the points that I would love to make to this young woman is these are the mistakes, these are the fatal errors that we make on the left where somebody doesn't pass our purity test and we just throw them right out of the tent. What are you going to do without a guy like Ezra Klein? Do you know how much more power Ezra Klein has than your little YouTube channel? When you take the top opinion writer for the New York Times and because you don't like his rather mild take on a subject, you just toss him all his expertise, all his proficiency, all his power, all his connections, all his know-how right out of the window, and you want to know why we keep losing? That's a perfect example of why we keep losing.
But the conditions for clear, good faith communication are not present in our real world. And regardless, the ability to persuade using such methods is certainly not found in Ezra Klein. He seems so keen on proving a worthwhile moral purity by apologizing, sympathizing, compromising, selling out groups of people on key issues to win over the approval.
See, and there we are, selling out groups of people on key issues. And this is, it's amazing to me. It baffles me that the Democratic Party is going to choke on the trans issue. And she's talking about purity, right? Where she's coming from is a place of we've established these as moral facts. And if you deviate from those moral facts, then you're an evil person. And so what she's doing is she's tossing Ezra out of the tent based on a purity test. Now, Ezra is bound by trans. I listened to the interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates twice, and they both were literally choking over the trans issue. They were both asking, why did we lose the last election? And saying at the same time, we have to protect the trans community. What if trans isn't real? Not at the level that it currently presents itself. A 50-fold increase would mean that it's possible that for every 50 people that are claiming trans now, 49 are lying about it. Does that make sense? A trans skeptic like me, my concern isn't with the very rare individual who may truly have some condition where a gender reassignment surgery makes them feel better. My concern is with the other 49 out of that 50-fold increase. You had one 15 years ago that was true, and that was 1 in 10,000. Now you have 1 in 200, which means you have another 49, a 50-fold increase, who I have cause to ask, where were you 15 years ago? 15 years ago, it wasn't so dangerous to be a trans. We just had, gay marriage. We had Will and Grace in the 90s. We've had tons of pop stars and writers and political figures come out as gay. There was plenty of acceptance in the 90s and in the 2000s. that trans could have come out then if it were truly a thing. And then when you look at history, I was an English literature major. I had a professor in college, God bless her soul. Her name was Wendy Bashant. I really liked her, though I didn't agree with her on a lot of things. But she was a feminist literature professor, the kind of woman that would spell woman with a Y, WOMYN, to take the man out of it. We studied English literature. I mean, going back hundreds of years, there's plenty of evidence of homosexuality in English literature. There is no evidence of people being locked in the wrong sex of their body. Trans was not there. That's what I'm saying. I'm old enough, liberal enough, and have been around enough to know that if trans were a thing the way it is today, it would have been expressing itself in history, and you can't find it. People are going to shoehorn in little things. Oh, there was cross-dressers in the Weimar Republic and back in Rome and Cleopatra. No, 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 no. No. Joan of Arc. No, that's not trans, right? At best, it's the thing that we all recognize the whole time, which is that lesbians tend towards the butch and that gay men tend towards the effeminate. But nobody back then was saying, "Oh, I'm locked in the wrong body," except for the very rare individual.
Of a radical right who will never see or hear him, an audience perceiving the world through a propaganda filter, and whose goals of hate and bigotry would always prefer the ultimate option over a weaker compromise version. Because if you hated immigrants as your whole thing, why would you settle for less when you could have more? He assumes an earnestness that's not there, willing to compromise or sacrifice for show, but not seeing the underlying financial insecurity that led people onto xenophobia in the first place. He repeatedly asks his guest, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who seems like a brilliant writer, what should we do about this? But with the same passive-aggressive attitude, one might ask their partner, what should we do for dinner? And then shut down every answer except the one they already thought of anyway. He dismisses the hard truths of civil rights battles experienced by Black Americans since this country was founded, calling it fatalistic because it's not a one-and-done magic.
I just have to comment on that. The civil rights battles that Black people have fought since this country was founded, that's a logical fallacy on the left for sure. Since this country was founded, every time you say since this country or the history of racism in this country or the history of sexism in this country, it makes it sound like it's only existed in this country. You mean the history of racism since the beginning of human history. You mean the history of sexism since, human beings walked the earth. You mean homophobia. You mean transphobia since the beginning of time. We just happen to live in a country and a culture that's blessed enough to have the freedom to criticize itself. The optical illusion, the mental illusion that happens is since we only criticize ourselves, we think we're the only ones worthy of criticism, right? I'm sure this woman is for Mamdani, right? Find me a Muslim country where there are trans rights.
One fix. That the journey to a perfect world is not a one-step solution. Ezra Klein conflates hard times with defeat. We don't need to compromise on people's rights. The establishment left has a messaging problem. No one is hearing you. When center-left and far-left hobbyists conflate their own personal validation as good or pure with progress or success, they fail. The right does not concern itself with likability to the opposition, or even to their base. Politics is not about yourself. Don't be deafened by your own ego.
So there's a deeper theme here to what she's talking about, and this is probably the most dangerous thing. The argument is that the right's not going to listen to us anyways. The argument is that the right isn't going to open itself up to dialogue, to facts, to logic, etc. I don't necessarily disagree with that. But where she's going with this, even if she doesn't say it outright, is that we should start to behave in our politics the way that the right behaves in their politics. The problem with that is that then you will find yourself in a civil war. You will find yourself in a hot civil war. And that's a big worry of mine. I mean, we are living under autocracy right now. The ICE is riding the subway in my hometown of Chicago. Masked men are pulling people off of the streets. The Trump administration is executing people off the coast of Venezuela. We just snatched up a bunch of people based on the, Bulls gear that they wore and sent them to a torture prison. This is serious stuff. I'm not saying that the right will ever come around to their moral sensibility again. Her problem here is if that's where it's at and this is where you want our politics to go, do you think that we could win a hot civil war with the right? Seriously. That's the depth that she lacks here. What she's going for is the same purity that she accuses the right of going for. We're right about everything. There's nothing that we're wrong about. All we have to do is change our messaging. It's so deeply naive. You're correct in your assessment that the right may be immune to any sort of reasoning. You're wrong in thinking that the size of that group of people is large enough at this point in time to they're not the majority. So MAGA is at best 35% of the country. They won, maybe. I think there's real questions as to whether or not there was vote shifting in the election. But let's just say that they won outright. They won because of independents who were, for lack of a better term, icked out by trans, right? This woman wants penises in locker rooms around little girls in Virginia, in Alabama, in Mississippi, in Missouri, in Montana. That's what trans means. You don't have to have your genitals removed to identify as trans, and then through her logic, through the laws that she would like to see, use a woman's locker room. I mean, it's beyond the bathroom dispute. At least in bathrooms, you have separate stalls, and you only, especially in a women's bathroom, you only see people, washing their hands. You do your thing in private. But for the average swing voter, for the average independent who's not dyed in the wool MAGA, what trans means to them is penises around little girls. Because if you identify as trans, but you haven't had the gender reassignment surgery, based on the left's logic, they should be able to enter any locker room anywhere that they want. And that means penises around little girls. And that on its own is enough to get that, mythical swing voter just to say, no. I went to school in Iowa. There's a lot of good people in Iowa, but they do not want to expose their children to that. And also, if trans is the social phenomenon that I believe it to be, they don't want their kids exposed to that social phenomenon. No more than you'd want your kids hanging out with Scientologists. Anyways, the larger point being, she's advocating for a hardcore approach to politics on the left that exists on the right. If we do that, we will find ourselves in a hot civil war. And who's going to fight that hot civil war for you? The trans community? The gender studies community? Right? In a real sense, this last election was, trans and, non-binary versus hunters and mixed martial artists, right? Who's your average Joe Rogan viewer, right? People who are into hunting, mixed martial arts, cars, rockets, and the left. If we go hot civil war, who's going to stand up to that? Who's going to beat back ICE? This is a real question that the left doesn't even know that they need to ask.
The right does not concern itself with likability to the opposition, or even to their base. Politics is not about yourself. Don't be deafened by your own ego, ever. People will happily, knowingly support an imperfect person if it leads to ends that help themselves. If that doesn't sit right with you, if your privilege is getting in the way of that, it's not your moment to lead.
So what she's saying there to Ezra Klein and everybody else like Ezra Klein is shut up, sit down, you're wrong, feel guilty, and let somebody else lead. And so what does that do to you politically? It gets a guy like Ezra Klein. He won't leave the Democratic Party, but this happened to Matt Taibbi. He was on the left, and then he got, uh, caught up in the whole Me Too movement, and then he became one of the strongest voices for Trump. Shut up, sit down, check your ego, check your privilege. That's one I don't like. I grew up in a black community. I didn't hear about white privilege until Facebook came around. It's such a Mm, it stings. It's calibrated in a way to say something on the face of it, but hit at a deeper level. Like nobody ever worked for anything that they've got. It's all just been privileged. We're just every white person was born with a silver spoon in their mouth. You want to know why you're turning people off to the Democratic Party? There you go. If I was to come and try to be a part of a political coalition with her, that's what she would do to me. And then what? What if I don't want to feel guilty anymore? What if I'm done with that? What if I just say no? What if I just say I don't care? Right? People like me then will either step back and become uninvolved, which is, just a tacit vote for the right, or they'll go over to the right. I'll never go over to the right because I think MAGA is evil. But again, this is how you're splintering and weakening the left with your naive purity, where you think you've got everything figured out and you really haven't taken it to a deeper level. So she goes on a little bit. This has gotten long. That's plenty. But I just wanted to react to that and show how much the left needs to, I mean, get down to brass tacks, get down to specifics. Again, in that interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates, my only real criticism of both of them is that they realize we keep losing and they keep asking, what are we doing wrong? And then they don't want to get specific about it. They don't want to sacrifice any of their sacred cows. Maybe trans isn't what it presents itself to be. To Ta-Nehisi Coates, maybe it's time to stop haranguing white people. Maybe you've gotten everything you're going to get out of that, and maybe it's time to start getting black fathers to take care of their children. Maybe it's time to take a look at what hip hop culture really is and what it really represents. A lot of black men voted for Trump because he was the most gangster, right? There's plenty to look at on the left. It's just a question of whether or not people are going to have the willpower to do that.